Yeah.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
I was going to ask Meghan, in contemporary times, what is a memorable moment of technical prowess or bonding that M&B has had recently?
Sure. So we don't do Calliopes anymore, and there's been a lot of talk about trying to bring them back because, I mean, hearing all of the stories. And we are moving in that direction. We still do midnight theater, and two of them last year were musicals, but we didn't write the music, we just changed the lyrics. So nothing, obviously, on this scale. But having worked on musicals, non-student written, it's all the same. There's still it's still traumatic. There's still Easter break in Fulton and late nights, using video projectors. We had computers in a musical once, and there's literally someone like hiding under a curtain operating it, and the actors pretending. So yeah, the spirit of Calliope still exists on campus, even if the actual student-written part of the musical has gone to sleep for a couple of years.
Meghan, I remember 2 years ago we were putting on a production of Jekyll and Hyde, which involves first there's a transformation, Dr. Jekyll into Mr. Hyde, but at the end of the show there was a wedding scene. So it was the night before the show was going to go up. It was the final dress rehearsal, and we had gotten to the transformation scene, and there was some miscommunication over a headset, and one of the ASMs pulled the Dropbox cord for the flower petals. So during Dr. Jekyll's transformation, all the flower petals. So these kind of things still do happen.
Yeah.
It's good business. Keep it.
One question, Steph. Were all the Calliopes in Trinity, or were there ever any Calliopes that were in Trinity?
I think they all were except senior prom. Is that right?
Where was senior prom?
All of them.
Michael?
You know, I think one of the things we talk about remembering these things, and one of the things we need to remember is our average age was 20 when we did these things, and you know, life at 20 is very intense anyway. But this was an enormously intense experience for people who really hadn't experienced this kind of intensity in their lives. And you know, and Donn called on all of us to do things that we had never done before. I mean, how many 20-year-olds make a schedule and have to stick to it? You know, we were taught by Donn how to go out and manage people who don't want to be managed, and how to inspire people to do non-inspirational things. You know, and these were remarkable personal discoveries for a 20-year-old. As I said to someone the other night, being on a Calliope was like being part of Band of Brothers without the bullets, and with only slightly better food. It's an experience that you won't forget because you learned how to do things during a Calliope that you will stay, we do for the rest of your life. So it was very intense.
Yes.
And,
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, and then we'll get you.
the other thing is that, particularly as Calliope became a long-standing tradition, it was a big event on campus. Everybody knew about it. They were looking forward to it. So it was our 15 minutes. Of course we remember every second of it. And then, in fact, it got to be big news outside of Georgetown and around Washington. And the closing night of senior prom was a Sunday. And I guess we must have had an 8 o'clock curtain, and there was a production of Romeo and Juliet at the Folger Shakespeare Library, which had only just begun doing theater. And they must have had a 7 o'clock curtain, and they were dying to see senior prom. So at intermission, they all load in. They had done Romeo and Juliet in 2 hours flat with intermission, so that they could come and see the second act of senior prom.
It's absolutely true. I was in the show. We all got together at Folger and we said, if we do this show really fast, we the curtain of senior prom. And Munson Hicks, who was the director from New York of the show, came back to see the show that night unbeknownst. And he came backstage furious and said, what the fuck was that? And he said, shut up, Munson, get in the car, we have to go see
it. That actually leads to my question, which is, I think Senior Prom is the only Calliope to be produced by M&B twice. So I was wondering, for those of you who were involved in the first production, what was the origin of the show and what was its afterlife?
After I got out of school, I went to New York, shocked not to find the doors of the theaters of New York were not flinging themselves open on my arrival on the island of Manhattan. So I was at home and I stumbled upon my sister's collection of 45 records from this party she had in our basement around the time of her senior prom. And I began listening to them. And the mind wanders, you know. I thought, Jesus, I like this music. And I began to think about my sister's senior prom and what I had picked up about it as, you know, as they were preparing for it and afterwards, and how it sounded like the most exciting thing and the most dramatic thing that I'd ever heard of. And I thought, well, let's do that. And I wanted to do something that took place in real time, a show that took place in real time, because I had seen something in New York and I was fascinated about the use of real time. And then I called up Bill, who was, we had worked on Operation Sidewinder that we talked about before, and he was the musical director of it, and he had rearranged a number into a 50s number, so he had a similar affinity to mine, to that music. And then we sat down and began googling out ideas.
And Jack came to me and said, I've got this idea for a show. I think it'll be a good Calliope. You play guitar. Do you want to write some songs? And I said, yeah, let's talk about it. So he had the idea to write, to have the evening unfold as a senior prom so that the audience would kind of be flies on the wall at a senior prom. And we set it in the year 1957, and what really struck me about it as being advantageous, an advantageous choice was, think back to the 1950s was the first time that kids, that teenagers, had their own music. And it was a really revolutionary thing to happen at that time, because kids, for the first time, you know, just after Perry Como and that generation, they saw their own concerns and their own hopes and their own fears and their own situations reflected in the popular music of the day. And I thought, what a great idea for a musical to show kids dealing with what is probably one of the most intense evenings of their young lives so far, and have all of these stories play out in real time, and yet craft the songs almost as though they were songs that the kids could have heard on the radio, that could have been, for a particular character, could have been their song, or would have really reflected their lives or their situation, their hopes. And so it just felt like a really great combination.
And everything, excuse me, everything in the show takes place in the gym at the night of the prom, or in the bathroom where they weren't giving birth to children.